between those who believe that the law had or should reflect a larger morality, maybe religious-based, maybe morality / secular-based, or on the other hand, that the law should merely reflect what Hart would call the harm principle. Unless there was a physical harm, the law had no right making a judgment about people's behavior, again, with children being accepted. And that debate was raging. And you'll see that certainly this film ultimately takes the position of the harm principle, which comes out of John Stuart Mill's famous book on liberty, which all of you should read immediately after seeing this film. And it really, it really is an advocacy work in some sense, but again, it does it in a lot with what I would argue is a light touch with some really great performances. Now, you know, another point against the idea that this is merely a period piece, and maybe an imperfect period piece because it reflects a sort of tenuous approach to the issue that holds back somehow. Again, I'm echoing some of the critics. You don't have to know their names; they're not worth reading. But you know, as I prepared for this lecture, it struck me how contemporary this film is. And in the last 2 weeks, you will note that there was two incidents in particular, putting aside the general issue of same-sex marriage, resonated with me in terms of the lasting quality of this film. First of all, there was an interview in the New York Times with Dr. Spitzer, who is the godfather of the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is the Bible for psychiatrists and diagnosis. And Dr. Spitzer, in the 70s, by his position, was able to steer the DSM away from the pathologicalization of homosexuality and withdrew it as a disease, which had tremendous legal and cultural resonance. Subsequently, however, Dr. Spitzer, many years later, wrote an article where he referred, if not favorably, neutrally, to a study, studies on sort of homosexual repatriation. In other words, the idea that somehow through therapy you could become de-homosexualized and heterosexual. And he took a lot of flack about that. And now he's 80 years old, suffering from Parkinson's disease, and he's going on the radio and going on the record giving a mea culpa about that article and what he feels the damage it did, because many of these studies turned out to be, that justified the repatriation, to be flawed, and many of the practitioners were little more than quacks. And, but that says something, I think, that, first of all, a big shot doctor saying I made a mistake, that's almost unheard of in our culture, which says something. And two, that this idea of the disease factor is still around, that has to be knocked down, as it were. And so I think that resonates with the fact that we here in New York City live in a sort of cloistered world, if I might say, in the sense that all of these questions in the Midlands and the Heartlands are still up for debate for all sorts of religious and now we see political reasons. But even more important than the issue involving Dr. Spitzer was the fact that just 2 weeks ago in Virginia, the Republican governor of Virginia nominated for the Superior Court of Virginia, which is the lower court, the trial court, an attorney who had been a lifelong state prosecutor with a sterling record, and before he had been a prosecutor, he had been a fighter pilot in the Navy. Yet, with all those credentials, the Republican state-controlled Senate, the same party as the governor, still voted down this person's nomination. Why? Because he was openly gay and was living with his domestic partner, and they had adopted children. And the ostensible reason given was that, quote, he has an agenda because he belonged to some gay organization. Now, what does that say about this movie to us? It says to us that even in the year 2012 in the United States, an individual who has an impeccable record, impeccable credentials to be a judge, that his opposition could find nothing wrong with his professional life. He was a patriot. He was a fighter pilot. All the qualities that we associate with public service, and a fair-minded prosecutor. And yet, when it came to putting him on the bench, something wasn't kosher within the Republican caucus. And when I read that and I saw that, it made me sad, but it also made me feel that this movie is still important. And perhaps, if I could, if I had the time and the money, I would love to send a copy of the movie to everybody who voted against that individual and see if it might change their opinion. I rather doubt it, but symbolically it might make me feel better.